Hello, and welcome back to the Think Long and Hard channel. We are going through Randy Fujishin's book, Gifts from the Heart, 10 Ways to Build More Loving Relationships. And we just finished up chapter 2, which was titled Accepting Yourself and Others. And now we are on to gift 3, Communicating for Connection. And it opens with a quote from Mary Sarton. Our willingness to connect with others determines the quality of our lives. 3 dark figures walked slowly from my office toward the parking lot. I couldn't see their faces on that warm June evening, but I knew the husband, the wife, and the 12-year-old son were smiling just the same. The greatest reward I receive as a counselor is to watch individuals behave more lovingly toward others and themselves. The family had taken a significant step in that direction because the husband had chosen to communicate for connection rather than for competition. During the family's first 2 therapy sessions, the father dominated the discussion by directing criticism at his wife and son. He would compete for my attention by constantly interrupting his wife and son, and he would often criticize my suggestions and comments. At the conclusion of the second session, I told the husband, "You have 2 choices whenever you open your mouth. You can communicate for competition and criticism, or you can communicate for connection. The first choice will make life miserable for your family, me, and yourself. The second will make life enjoyable for everyone, yourself included. The choice is always yours." Then something miraculous happened. The husband changed his behavior. He didn't change immediately, and he didn't change completely, but he did change. The husband still interrupted and criticized, but not nearly as often. He participated willingly, even enthusiastically. By the end of the 5th hour of therapy, he had not only told his wife and his son he loved them, he also told me I had changed his life. "I never had someone tell me I actually had a choice in how I talked," he admitted. "My dad always yelled and criticized us when I was growing up, so I guess I sort of just did the same with my family. But I don't want to be miserable. I don't want my family to be unhappy either, so I'm trying to communicate for connection." He still communicates for connection with his family more than 3 years after that warm June evening. That's profound. That's good stuff. How do you usually communicate? From my observations, I'm convinced that the majority of our communication with others is evaluative in nature. That is, we judge or evaluate just about everything that is shared with us. I agree, I disagree. That's good, that's bad. You're wrong, you're right. The list goes on forever. This is communicating for competition, where we actually compete for who is right and who is wrong. Communication for competition separates us from one another. It builds walls, not bridges. Communicating for connection is not about victory, control, or mastery. The goal is not to win an argument, criticize an opponent, or even report the facts. The primary purpose of communicating for connection is the linking of hearts and the joining of souls. Occasionally, you may have a difference of opinion to air, a criticism to share, or a conflict to resolve. But the primary intent and focus of communicating for connection is to join with those you love and establish ties that will withstand the tugging of differences, conflict, and distance. Linguist and author Deborah Tannen asserts that men communicate for competition rather than connection. They communicate to persuade, to convince, to argue, and to win. Men aren't the only ones who are rewarded for these skills. Women are assuming increasingly more of the persuasive, assertive, and motivational communication skills so they can more effectively compete in the workplace. These communication skills are essential to getting the job done and the objectives achieved. But in matters of the heart, they are more often the primary cause of relational conflict, frustration, and misunderstanding. If it works on the job, it doesn't necessarily work at home. We tend to learn and give the gift of communicating for connection to bond with loved ones. As someone wisely observed, on your deathbed, you won't wish you had spent more time at the office. If anything, you will regret not having spent more time with your loved ones. It is your relationships and deep connections with others that give life its meaning. It's true. On our deathbeds, very few of us will be consoled by clutching our diplomas, bank statements, or deeds of trust. Most of us would rather spend our final moments holding the hand of someone we have loved and who has loved us in return. This is how we would like to end our life journey. But how do we get to that point? More importantly, how can we live our lives every day so we experience more loving relationships now? The answer, I believe, lies in learning and practicing the skills that connect us with others. Components of communication. Before we explore specific ways to communicate for connection, let's look at the components of communication, the building blocks of connection. To begin with, we will define communication. For our purposes, we will use one of the simplest definitions I know. Communication is the sending and receiving of messages. Essentially, it is the process of putting your thoughts and feelings into words and behaviors that will be accurately received and understood by another person. The communication process also involves your accurate reception of other person's words and behaviors so you can understand his thoughts and feelings. Communication is the only way we can relate to each other. Without communication, a relationship is impossible. To better understand the communication process, let's examine its 4 primary components. Participants. Without the individuals who are communicating messages to one another, there is no communication process. People are the reason for communication. Each individual is in the communication event is both the sender and receiver of messages, often at the same time. We are the participants of communication. Messages. Messages that are communicated between participants can be either thoughts or feelings, such as the thought, "let's go now," or the feeling, "I am happy." Messages can contain both thoughts and feelings in the same statement, such as, "I am happy we are going now." Messages are like the paintings of the mind and the heart. The purpose of communication is to convey these images of thought and feeling accurately. Sounds good so far. But the meaning of the words that represent these images, these thoughts and feelings, is not in the words themselves, but in the people who send and receive them. The symbol or word love does not mean the same thing to different people. The images the word love can evoke in the minds of people are as varied as the individuals themselves. For one person, love means romance. For another, sex. And for yet another, manipulation. Meaning is in people and not in words. To better understand this concept, we'll examine the encoding-decoding process. Encoding-decoding. When someone wants to communicate the message, "I love you," he will have to encode that feeling into words and behaviors that he believes will most accurately convey his message. "I love you," "I want to be yours," "you turn me on," and "I want to be with you" are all possibilities he may consider to communicate his feeling. He decides which is best. But words are just the beginning of the encoding process. He must now decide how to communicate the message. The nonverbal categories of sound, sight, touch, smell, and taste are all possibilities. He could whisper or shout his message. He could scribble it on the back of a hamburger wrapper or have it plastered on a billboard. He could also convey his message with a gentle hug, a scent of cologne, or the taste of homemade cookies. The encoding process involves decisions on the part of the sender, who determines the content and form a message will take. Once the message has been sent, the receiver begins the decoding process. How is the content and form of the message interpreted? That is determined by a number of variables. The receiver's physical abilities, psychological makeup, and emotional state are just a few of the many factors that contribute to the decoding process. Interpretation of a simple note stating "I love you" depends on the receiver's eyesight, personal definition of the word love, current emotional state, and location where the note is read. These are just a few simple variables that influence and determine the receiver's decoding process. The process begins anew when the receiver assumes the sending role and encodes her message of response. Context. All of this complicated encoding and decoding of messages by the participants in the communication event occurs within a certain context, which takes into account the cultural, historical, and social climate of the event. "I love you" scribbled on a Hallmark card may be acceptable in America, But in Japan, such a direct statement of affection may be considered impolite or rude. If the sender has a known history of sending these cards to anyone with a mailbox, the message could easily be discounted. But if the sender has a history of reticent behavior, his message could take on greater meaning. Finally, if the card is received after an argument, it could be interpreted differently than if it were received after an enjoyable meal. The context within the message is sent plays an important role in the reception and interpretation of the message. The communication process at first glance may appear simple and straightforward, but as you have seen, the various components of this process suggest a much more involved and complex system of sending and receiving messages. To keep communication as specific and clear as possible, we need to claim ownership of our statements. Own your communication. I statements. This is important. When you communicate to another person, it is important that your messages be as specific and clear as possible. To avoid confusion and ambiguity, you need to use I statements, which allow you to own your thoughts and feelings. It is your ownership of messages that enables you to effectively express who you are. Here are some examples of I statements. I want to live in the country. I like the rain. I think you are intelligent. My opinion is that it is better to own a home than to rent a home. Each of these I statements shows speaker ownership. Did you notice how an I statement doesn't necessarily have to contain the word I? For example, my opinion is that it is better to own a home than to rent a home is an I statement because it shows ownership by the word my. I statements provide several advantages. First, an I statement lets the receiver of the message know who owns or originated the thought or idea. If I statements are not used, ownership of the message may be uncertain or overstated. Look at the following examples of non-I statements. Most people want to live in the country. Everybody likes the rain. All of the class thinks you are intelligent. People believe that it is better to own a home than to rent a home. Compare these 4 non-I statements to the 4 I statements. Do you get a different feeling from the I statements? I statements show ownership of the thought or feeling, whereas non-I statements do not. The second advantage of I statements is that they provide a target for the receiver of the message to respond to. If a speaker says, everybody likes the rain, the receiver might be less likely to disagree because the source of the message and the target of a rebuttal is everybody rather than the speaker. It's as if the entire world, everybody, was standing behind the speaker, supporting her opinion. If the speaker owned the opinion by using an I statement, I believe everybody likes the rain, the receiver might be more likely to disagree or discuss the matter. The third advantage of I statements is that they prevent people from speaking for others. This often happens in relationships where members are too close or enmeshed for healthy functioning. Listen for the unhealthy tone of the following statements in which the speaker actually speaks for others. Sarah feels it is important for us to discuss our problems. My boyfriend always tells me I should go back to school. My parents are excited about our future. My boss thinks you are unfair. I statements would prevent these types of remarks from occurring. The fourth advantage of I statements is that they offer more thoughtful statements. Because they show ownership, I statements force the speaker to weigh remarks more cautiously. It is easier to flippantly say, everyone really likes you, rather than own the statement and say, I like you. When I require my students and clients to use I statements, they generally respond more slowly, perhaps suggesting more thoughtful remarks, and softly. The final advantage of I statements is that they discourage blaming others. Many times we use what is called you statements instead of I statements. We send you messages such as, you make me upset, you talk too much, you're a grouch. You statements can be messages of condemnation, which direct blame to the receiver. If the speaker used I statements instead, he would be required to own more of the message rather than shifting all the blame to the receiver, you. Notice the shift in ownership and clarity when the same 3 statements are recast as I statements. I get upset when you call me honey. You make me upset. I noticed you have been speaking for 20 minutes. You talk too much. I see you are not smiling again. You're a grouch. Do you see how I statements change the tone of each statement? The I statements have less of a blaming and fault-finding tone. They emphasize the speaker's perceptions and feelings, not the receiver's. Once again, I statements show ownership of opinions and feelings. The I statement is the fundamental building block of the messages we send. Remember to own your statements when you communicate for connection. Levels of communication. Now that you know how to construct an I statement, the next step in the process of communicating for connection is to examine the 4 levels of communication: surface talk, reporting facts, giving opinions, and sharing feelings. Each level represents a different type of information, which in turn represents a different degree of intimacy in how much information is shared. In surface talk, the speaker provides little personal information and merely acknowledges the other person with some pleasantry or greeting. In reporting facts, the speaker conveys information that can be verified or proven. In giving opinions, the speaker discloses beliefs, attitudes, or opinions. In sharing feelings, the speaker communicates at the deepest level, the relating of emotions. True connections with loved ones occurs at the level of sharing feelings. During the course of one conversation, we can communicate at all 4 levels of communication, yet most of our conversations are limited to the less personal levels of surface talk, reporting facts, and giving opinions. We generally reserve sharing feelings for conversations with individuals we trust. If we have talked with someone at the surface level and find it satisfactory, we generally venture to the next level, reporting facts. If the listener then betrays our trust by gossiping about information we have disclosed, we would tend not to communicate with the individual at this level again. In fact, we would probably restrict communication to the surface talk level, if we even talk to the person at all. We don't usually go to the next level of disclosure until we trust the other person at the present level. Let's examine the 4 levels of sharing in more detail. Let's. Level 1, surface talk. In the first level of communication, we keep our conversations to minimal disclosure. The surface talk level includes greetings, casual acknowledgement of strangers and acquaintances, chit-chat with coworkers, and so forth. The primary goal is to acknowledge another individual without providing any personal information about ourselves. Listen to the following surface level remarks. Nice to see you. You too. How's it going? Fine. How about you? Great. Take it easy. See you around. The purpose of surface talk is to acknowledge another person in a socially acceptable manner, not to conduct some deep, involved conversation with them. Level 2, reporting facts. The next level of communication involves the disclosing of facts. Introducing yourself at a party, remarking that you've won a lottery, and telling your roommate that the dishes have been washed are all examples of reporting factual information. The key to identifying communication at this level is that the content of messages can be verified or proven. Here are examples of reporting facts. My blood pressure is 170/95. We have dinner reservations for 8 p.m. I have a gift for you in the garage. I've been clean and sober for 3 years. Reporting factual information about yourself can be important in connecting with those you love. It is the level of communication at which you begin to share who you are. Level 3, giving opinions. The next deeper level of communication is giving opinions. This level is a little riskier than reporting facts. By giving your opinions about topics, people, or events, you are exposing more of who you are. You are allowing others to see your opinions, attitudes, and beliefs. This can be much more threatening because there is a greater chance of disagreement, disapproval, and conflict brought about by showing differences of opinion. Disagreement is natural. We couldn't possibly agree on every topic we discuss with others, and we wouldn't want to. That's the beauty of being in a relationships. It is often our differences that make people attractive to us. These differences add to us, complement our weaknesses, and show us new ways of seeing, thinking, and feeling. The development of trust is essential in sharing opinions. Trust is something you build by sharing your opinions with others and believing they will hear your opinions, share their own, and discuss the differences in an atmosphere of safety and acceptance. Here are examples of opinions. I believe I could learn to fly an airplane. I think our relationship can work. I predict my parents will give you the money. Level 4, sharing feelings. The deepest level of communication is the sharing of feelings. The communication of facts and opinions paints a two-dimensional figure of who we are. The sharing of feelings provides our loved ones with a three-dimensional person to connect to. It is at the sharing feelings level that people really communicate for connection. Although women are usually much more willing to communicate at the feelings level, men can also be encouraged to share their emotions with loved ones. Here are 3 ways to communicate feelings with those you love: direct feeling statements, explanation feeling statements, and picture feeling statements. Direct feeling statements. The most basic way to communicate feelings is to use direct feeling statement, which is an I statement containing a feeling word. Here are some examples. I feel delighted. I'm feeling sad. I'm proud of you. I love you. Explanation feeling statements. The second way to share a feeling is with an explanation feeling statement. In this statement, you not only own the feeling, you also include information about the feeling. In the following examples, each statement is divided into the direct feeling statement and the explanation for the feeling. And these would be, I'm happy because you took the day off. I felt embarrassed ever since I gave that speech. I feel so exuberant after completing my cross-country trip. I feel ashamed that I broke my promise to you. Did you notice how explanation feeling statements provide more information for the receiver of the message? You don't always have to include an explanation for your feelings. In fact, because feelings are not rational or logical, many times you might not have a reason or explanation for feeling a certain way. If that is the case, you can simply say, I'm feeling upset and I don't know why. What is important is that you begin to share your feelings with those you love. Sharing feelings is the primary means of communicating for connection. Picture feeling statements. The third way you can share a feeling is with a smile, a description using the words as if or like. Similes often provide the receiver with a different way of hearing or processing your feeling statement. Read these examples of picture feeling statements and see if your response differs from the direct feeling statements that follow in parentheses. I feel like I'm floating on a cloud. I feel relaxed. I feel as if I'm chained to my desk. I'm feeling overworked. The wonderful thing about these picture feeling statements is that they provide a visual description of the feeling you are experiencing. They can also open up different channels of communication between you and your loved ones. The 4 levels of communication provide an understanding of how we connect verbally with those we love. Although reporting facts and giving opinions are vital to successful communication, it is the sharing of your emotional life, your feelings, that deepens and strengthens your relationships. Without your willingness and ability to communicate at this 4th level of communication, your relationships will lack intimacy and depth. In the rest of this book, you will explore specific methods and techniques to encourage communication at the 3 deeper levels of communication discussed in this section. The most important thing to keep in mind when communicating for connection is that your attitude and your desire to connect are more important than any technique or skill. With this in mind, let's look at the goals of the LINK process of communicating for connection. That's L-I-N-K. The LINK process. Whether I'm working with clients in therapy or students in classes, I have them keep 4 fundamental desires in mind, no matter what communication gift they are giving. These 4 desires, which help preserve the spirit and attitude of communicating for connection, are summarized in the acronym LINK. And those are listen, L, invite, I, notice, N, and know, K. Listen, the desire to listen. Theologian Paul Tillich maintains that the first duty of love is to listen. The first duty of love is to listen. That's awesome. Unlike communicating for competition, with its emphasis on projective verbal skills, the first duty of communicating for connection is the receptive skills of listening, being open and attempting to understand the thoughts and feelings of others. To really listen to other individuals may be one of the most difficult and demanding activities we can undertake, but we can never truly begin to connect with other people without the desire to listen to what they have to share. Invite, the desire to invite. The second desire necessary in communicating for connection is that of wanting others to open up to us and share their thoughts and feelings, concerns and dreams, hurts and triumphs. Communicating for connection requires a deep desire to invite other people into our lives, to welcome them into our homes, and to make a place for them in our hearts. We need to communicate to them in a word and deed that they are invited into our lives. They should feel a spirit of hospitality and even of homecoming in our presence. We should greet those with whom we wish to develop relationships with a posture of warmth, acceptance, and excitement. We need to issue these invitations to a relationship. Notice, the desire to notice. The third desire is to pay attention, notice, and acknowledge those people we want in our lives. M. Scott Peck, author of The Road Less Traveled, believes that if you really love someone or something, you will give that person or object your full attention. The example he cites is the love a young boy might have for his first car. The boy spends time with it, washes and waxes it, and even sleeps in the back seat of the car because he cannot stand being away from the object of his love. Now that's passion. Well, you might not want to go that far, but you need to pay attention to the people you love. If you really want to know what a person loves, observe how that person spends his or her money and time. To communicate for connection requires that we pay attention to those we love. K. Know, the desire to know. All this desire and effort required for communicating for connection is worthless if we don't know to whom we are connected. We need a strong desire to know the person we are in a relationship with. What is the point of giving all these gifts from the heart if we don't know the person in whom we are investing this effort? Before I met my wife, I once dated a woman who never called me by my first name. During our first 3 dates, she never asked me one substantive question about myself. I don't know if she was capable of engaging in dialogue. Maybe she really wasn't interested in me at all as a person because she never quit talking about herself. Those were 3 of the most miserable evenings of my life. The desire to want to know someone, to take an interest in discovering the deeper thoughts, feelings, and dreams of another person is essential in a relationship. Guidelines for communicating for connection. As you give the gift of communicating for connection, keep in mind the following 5 guidelines. Increase I statement use gradually. Share your opinions and feelings appropriately. Don't force others to disclose. Keep a secret and be happy rather than being right. Increase I statements use gradually. Many times, my students and clients go overboard when they begin to increase their use of I statements in their everyday conversations. They delight in taking ownership of their thoughts and feelings, but tend to overwhelm and confuse their loved ones rather than connect with them. Overuse of I statements also can be perceived as a self-centered way of communicating. So increase your I statement use gradually. Be sensitive to the needs of others to express their thoughts and feelings too. Keep balanced. Speak and listen. Share your opinions and feelings appropriately. Sharing feelings and opinions is important to establish and maintain intimate connections with your loved ones. Whether you are sharing with a romantic partner, family member, or close friend, your opinions and feelings enable other people to know who you are, what you believe, and how you feel. That same information may not necessarily be appropriate or interesting to people with whom you interact daily, such as the supermarket cashier, bus driver, or plumber. Make sure that you disclose personal information only to people who are truly important in your life. Don't force others to disclose. You may discover that sharing opinions and feelings with others becomes easier with practice, but don't make the mistake of thinking that your loved ones share a share a similar ability or willingness to disclose personal information. They may not, no matter how open you have become. As you communicate for connection, do not try to coerce others to share their opinions and feelings. You cannot force another person to do something. You can only share your truth and invite them to do the same with you. By not trying to force them to share, you create an open space in which they can relax, breathe, and maybe even change. Be patient. Keep a secret. As your loved ones disclose personal information to you, be careful not to violate their trust by telling others what you have found out. Keep their personal information to yourself. Even if you think your loved ones would not mind your sharing the information, don't. It is better to err on the side of preserving someone's privacy rather than disclosing information without permission and having to apologize later. When you consider public information, what you consider public information might be private to your loved ones. Preserve your relationships by being able to keep a secret. Be happy rather than right. A relationship is not a debate. The purpose of communicating for connection is not to win or to prove that you are right. The purpose is to establish lines of communication and avenues of meeting where you can get to know and appreciate the thoughts and feelings of other people. So what if you don't agree on everything? Big deal if you have different opinions about certain issues. It is these differences that make your relationship more interesting, refreshing, and stimulating. Don't view communicating as a debate or a contest with a winner or loser. See it as a means of getting to know another person. Yeah, that happens a lot, actually. The competition thing, it seems like, even just by accident. As you communicate in your relationships, remember that your primary goal is communication for connection, not competition. Rather than argue, persuade, or critique those you love, connect with them. By owning your statements and sharing your opinions and feelings, you can more effectively connect with others and give them something to connect to. Give the gift of connection to those you love. And so the activities at the end of this chapter are 3.1, personal exploration. Is it connection or competition? Before you begin to give the gift of communicating for connection, let's be certain that you learned the difference between statements that connect and statements that compete or evaluate. Read the following sentences and then mark an X next to those sentences that communicate for competition and mark an O next to those sentences that communicate for connection. Yeah, so one's for competition and one's for connection. The first one is, I think you are wrong for these 3 reasons. That'd be competition. You are not as good with money as my mom. You'll be broke soon. Competition. I love you. Connection. You always interrupt me with stupid questions. Quit it. Competition. I'm so sure you never help me when I have problems. Competition. How can I make you feel more comfortable when we're talking? Connection. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. Connection. 3.2 is personal exploration, connecting behaviors. List 3 individuals from your life who you feel are effective in their efforts to connect with you. Identify one specific behavior they demonstrate that makes you feel they are trying to connect rather than compete with you. And then 3.3 is practice giving, connecting with one person. Identify an individual you would like to connect with in a deeper way. He or she can be someone from work, school, or your family. Take the next 2 weeks to use some of the gifts presented in this chapter to connect with this individual in a more personal and intimate manner. How did you do? Were your attempts to connect with the individual successful? What would you do differently next time? What did you learn about yourself? And that's the end of gift number 3, or chapter number 3. Communicating for connection. Love it. Thank you, and see you next time. And remember, think long and hard.